Hello everyone, and welcome back to Complete and Total Random. Today we will be going over 6 Sherman tanks I would like to see added to War Thunder. With the sheer volume of Shermans produced during the Second World War, it was inevitable that other countries would get their hands on large quantities of these machines, and this made them perfect for modification into all sorts of different vehicles and different roles, some of them just being upgunned, other ones completely changing how the chassis was set up. To start off with, we will go over the Shermans used by the Indian Army post World War II. Though they did receive some Shermans in 1943, none of these would be modified. It wouldn't be until they received a large quantity from the British in 1947 that they would see a large amount of modification, though this would be much later in their lifespan. Some of these M4A3 and M4A4 tanks would eventually be upgraded to support the Soviet D-56T cannon. This modification took the gun used on their PT-76 amphibious light tanks and added it to their Shermans, allowing for a great increase in firepower. Though, because of this modification, the Sherman stabilizers had to be removed as they were not compatible with the PT-76's cannon. And yeah, I think this will be a great tank just to represent some more Indian tanks in game, kind of like we have the Bishma and the British tree. Next up, we have Yugoslavia's SO-122 prototype. During the 1950s, Yugoslavia received a large amount of armored vehicles from the West, including Sherman tanks. Many modifications of these vehicles would be looked into during the following years, one of which being the SO-122. The SO-122 started its development in 1956. Slight modifications were done to allow for the V2/R2 engine taken out of the T-34 to fit into the hull. Then, during the 60s, it was decided that they wanted to try and up-armor these Shermans with a 122mm cannon, the same one as used on tanks such as the IS-2. Though, due to lack of surviving information, very little documentation is known about this turret or any of its secondary weaponry. We can guess that it retained its hull machine gun, just from the pictures and images, but as far as we know, it is also the only modification of a Sherman to take such a large cannon. It is the largest cannon mounted in a Sherman, in a turret. And I think it would be a great addition to the game, though I'm not sure where exactly it would be put, in which tech tree. Next up, we have the Sherman Repotenciado. This modification was done by Argentina in 1978. These ex-British Fireflies were upgunned with the 105mm L44-57 gun. This created a tank that was similar in many aspects to Israel's M51 tank. Though the cannon was the same caliber, it was a different gun, different length, and different breech size. One interesting thing was that due to the smaller breech on the 105 compared to the 17-pounder that was originally in these Fireflies, this actually increased crew comfort by a considerable margin by making way more space inside the turret. Next up, we have the M4A3R3, otherwise known as the Sherman Zippo, or at least one of the tanks known as the Sherman Zippo. This World War II variant of the Sherman only saw one change. Its coaxial machine gun was replaced by a flamethrower. This was nicknamed by the Marines, who were using it in the Pacific Theater. They saw a lot of use during the Pacific Theater. Flamethrowers saw a lot of use during the Second World War, as they were extremely effective at destroying bunkers and other fortifications, though they did fall out of use slowly after the Second World War, as guns got bigger and more powerful and were just able to just deal with the bunkers themselves, as opposed to having to get the tanks really close up to enemy fortifications. Though this style of vehicle isn't the only version of the Sherman with the flamethrower, I would like to see at least one version of it in game, as it was quite a substantially used type of Sherman. and I think it would make for a great maybe event vehicle or even tech tree vehicle. Next up, we have probably the most common addition to Shermans during World War II. These were the Sherman Bulldozers. These modifications were applied to multiple different Shermans on multiple different chassis, featuring both the 75 and 105 guns. I couldn't find any evidence for them being attached to the 76 mounted Shermans, but I have no reason to believe that they couldn't have been. These dozer blades were primarily used for clearing roads of debris, allowing for the continued advance through enemy territory. They could also be used to help clear damaged runways and other locations, and just help kind of fix up and allow for troops to pass, or like planes to land and other things, while also still maintaining the firepower of a tank to defend itself, as opposed to an armored bulldozer, which is essentially, in comparison, defenseless. These were very heavily used throughout the Second World War, so I would really like to see them represented in game. And lastly, we have the T6 Medium. This is the prototype of the Sherman tank. It was similar in most ways to a M4A1, but had some slight differences. First off, the turret had the same machine gun cupola for the commander as on the M3 Lee, as you can see on top of the picture there, and having side doors on the hull of the tank for escape. The tank housed the shorter M275 cannon, as it was available for testing, whereas the other 75, the M3, wasn't completed yet. This tank would be used also to test more modifications for the M4, even after the M4 was accepted and pushed into service. This is done, as far as we can tell, as late as 1947, as seen in this picture of a 1947 test for an up-armored housing differential for the Sherman. And with that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a little weird that we just went over Shermans, but I thought their history kind of made it worth going over. And I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a comment suggesting other vehicles you'd like me to go over, or maybe other series of vehicles. And with that, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one.